Welcome back to part 2 of our 4-part series on New Age spirituality. In today's episode, we'll take a deeper look into why New Age practices like crystals, psychic readings, and Reiki healing seem to be effective. When it comes to these practices, one of the main reasons that people cite for why they subscribe to them is that they have experienced many benefits from using them. Some time ago, I had a conversation with an acquaintance that identified as a Christian. In the middle of our conversation, the clock hit 11:11 and she abruptly interrupted our conversation to tell me to make a wish. She went on to explain that 11:11 was a powerful angel number and if I made a wish, it would come true. I politely explained that angel numbers and the like were not practices that align with the Christian faith. She replied and told me that she disagreed and went on to share that she used crystals to help her deal with her mother's death. She explained that she felt that there was no harm in using them because they worked for her and they helped her to deal with such a great loss. This young woman was convinced that the effectiveness of these practices automatically proved that they were acceptable for her to adopt. I remember pausing and asking the Lord how to respond to her. The Lord brought to mind occurrences in Scripture where we see people use power outside of the Christian faith to accomplish a feat. They were technically effective, but they came from the wrong source. For example, in Exodus 7, we see Pharaoh's magicians respond to Moses and Aaron's feat by also turning their staff into snakes. In Acts 16, Paul and Silas were followed by a female slave that was able to predict the future. Both Pharaoh's magicians and the young women were effective, but we have to ask ourselves, by whose power did they operate in order to be effective? Revelation 13 illustrates to us that Satan has the ability to give his power to created beings in order to deceive the masses. In Revelation 13:2, it says that the dragon, who we learn is Satan in Revelation 12, gives both his power and authority to one of the beasts mentioned throughout the book of Revelation. It goes on to say in Revelation 13 verses 3 and 4 that one of the heads of the beast will receive a fatal blow that will be healed, and the world will be in awe of this seemingly miraculous sign and then follow the dragon, aka Satan. It needs to be understood that the healing of the wound was not through the power of God, but through the limited power of his adversary. It was meant to fool those who watched the beast into thinking that he had divine power and thus he was sent from God. In verse 4, it goes on to say that people went on to worship the dragon because he gave the beast authority. In the same way, people see the false power of spiritual healers and their trinkets such as crystals, sage, and etc., and they attribute divine power to them. Little do they know that they are inadvertently worshiping and submitting to the power of Satan. In Mark 13, Jesus himself warns the disciples against Satan's deception through the use of power. In verse 22, he says, "For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, the elect." Let me be emphatically clear. There is no power greater than the power of God. No matter how powerful New Age practices may pretend to be, they do not stand a chance against the majesty and might of the only true and living God. This is evident in the fact that in Exodus 7, Aaron's snake ate the snakes that came from the magician's staff, and in the fact that Paul was able to cast out the demon that enabled the slave woman to tell the future. In Mark 13, Jesus warns his disciples about false signs and wonders so that they would be on guard against deception. Likewise, as followers of Christ, we must also not only heed Jesus' warning, but also do our part to warn those around us. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Join me next week for our 3rd episode in this series that answers the question, why New Age spirituality is so attractive.